Brutal game unfolding on Ukraine's front lines, where drone pilots are hunting Russians not just for survival, but for points. Kiev's military now rewarding confirmed kills. Ukraine is countering with bold strikes deep into Russian territory, with digital bonuses turning the killing fields into a blood-soaked leaderboard in a way. In fact, all this as Russia is slamming Ukrainian cities with drone and missile blitz.
Of course, everyone is involved because it's a great incentive for the unit. Everyone is motivated, and now we have also made it so that you get the most points for enemy.
What happens when 25 soldiers cross into one of the most heavily guarded borders on Earth? The Bryansk raid wasn't about capturing territory. It was about shattering an illusion.
Ukraine is under heavy Russian assault. Its cities are crumbling. Russian missiles and drones are raining day and night.
Accordingly, everyone is motivated to destroy manpower first and foremost.
Заодно і конкурують між собою, змагають.
Russia has also increased the heat on the ground. Kyiv says over 100,000 Russian soldiers have launched a new offensive to capture Pokrovsk.
Russia believed its homeland was untouchable. Ukraine proved otherwise. In this video, we'll break down how a small mobile strike team forced Moscow to scramble artillery, helicopters, and rocket firepower, just to stop a few dozen men. And more importantly, how that single move forced Russia to rethink its defenses along hundreds of miles of border. So why does this matter more than any tank battle so far? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video.
The front lines are also receding elsewhere too. Ukraine, on the other hand, is running short of weapons and soldiers.
The idea behind this program is that in the first stage, we started awarding a certain number of bonuses or points for each enemy hit, tank destroyed or damaged.
In such desperate times, Ukraine's Army of Drones bonus platform allows soldiers to convert battlefield successes into points that can be redeemed for equipment.
How can fewer than 25 men force one of the largest militaries on Earth to panic along its border? That is exactly the question raised by the raid in Russia's Bryansk region. In the early morning, a small group of Ukrainian fighters, somewhere between 15 and 25, slipped across the frontier. This was not a massive invasion with tanks and artillery, but a fast-moving strike team carrying light weapons and using the tree lines as natural cover. They crossed the border at a point believed to be thinly defended, moved toward their target, and launched what looked less like an occupation attempt and more like a lightning raid.
But this gamification of war is raising questions. The Ukrainian soldiers also have an unusually intimate view of the horrors playing out on the battlefield.
Within hours, the Russian military claimed it had faced down an incursion deep inside its territory. Moscow's version of events painted a dramatic picture. According to state-controlled outlets, they unleashed artillery batteries, multiple launch rocket systems, and attack helicopters in response. They spoke of civilian deaths, destroyed homes, and heavy damage to local villages. Yet independent verification was missing. Satellite images showed no decisive evidence of an intense battle. Videos circulated online, some showing smoke columns rising above rural houses, but their origins remained unclear. This gap between Moscow's claims and the images on the ground created uncertainty. Was this a large-scale clash or a small-scale raid magnified into a propaganda event? Ukraine described the mission very differently. Officials and sources connected to its military suggested this was not about terrorizing civilians, but disrupting logistics. They explained that the team's goal was to strike supply routes and force Russian border guards into a scramble. In their framing, this was a controlled incursion aimed at exposing weaknesses rather than holding territory. To supporters of Kyiv, it looked like proof that Russian defenses, stretched along hundreds of miles, could be tested and fractured by a handful of determined fighters. To Moscow, it justified massive retaliation and warnings of more to come. The use of speed and mobility was deliberate. Small teams can move quickly through wooded areas, avoid aerial surveillance, and retreat before heavy response forces even arrive. Think of it like a commando team cutting power lines into a city. A single snip pulls thousands of households into darkness, triggering emergency crews, backup generators, and constant alerts. The action itself is small, but the effect reaches far wider. In Bryansk, fewer than 24 men forced Russia to activate large numbers of soldiers, move weapons platforms closer to vulnerable border zones, and put local towns on high alert. What analysts noticed was not simply the raid itself, but the effect it had on Russian defense planning. Borders once considered secure now looked like possible entry points. If commanders were forced to defend every town with equal intensity, their resources would be stretched dangerously thin. A frontier of hundreds of miles is almost impossible to seal completely. For Ukraine, that realization is powerful. Even without the ability to hold Russian territory, it proved that the perceived shield guarding the homeland could be pierced at will. The disproportionate response is striking. A few dozen light infantry with rifles and anti-armor weapons drew in helicopters and rocket batteries that would normally face battalion-level opponents. Entire artillery units became tied up, countering a raid that might have lasted only a few hours. Even if Moscow downplayed the embarrassment domestically, to military leaders the message was unavoidable. Russia needed to commit far more resources to guard its side of the border than Ukraine needed to pressure it. Reserves that might have supported operations deeper in Ukraine were forced backwards to patrol rural villages inside Russia itself. The raid also shifted psychological ground. For over a year, Russian citizens were told that war existed elsewhere, across the border, far from their homes. This single event shattered that narrative. Reports of gunfire and explosions inside Russian territory reached local civilians, and video clips spread online within hours. Confidence in Moscow's claim of full security cracked. Even if Ukrainian fighters held no positions and captured no towns, they demonstrated that Russian soil is not beyond reach. The effect on morale, both civilian and military, matched or even outweighed the physical damage. And this raises the most pressing question of all. If fewer than 25 men with light weapons can create such a reaction, what about future raids repeated across different regions, perhaps coordinated, perhaps with heavier support? Each small strike forces Russia to shift more soldiers, more artillery, more aviation. The Bryansk raid set a precedent. It showed Ukraine can project power across the line, not to conquer land, but to steadily drain Russia's ability to feel secure in its own backyard. The deeper those strikes go, the harder it will be for Moscow to pretend control is absolute. The Bryansk raid exposed something Moscow worked hard to hide, that Russia is now defending its own towns and villages, not only attacking across the border. The image of a fortress state, secure and untouchable, collapsed the moment gunfire echoed on Russian soil. So here's the question for you. Will tomorrow's wars be won by heavy divisions of tanks and artillery, or by small, mobile strike teams that exploit weak points and shake morale? The Bryansk operation wasn't just another firefight. It marked a shift in gravity, proving that even Moscow cannot guarantee safety inside its own borders.